Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Assembly Member Boff.
Mr. Hogan Howe, Commissioner, sorry.
Sir Bernard.
Sir Bernard.
Sir Bernard.
It still feels very pretentious to me. So,
despite newspaper headlines to the contrary, there is no evidence that people trafficking increases during an Olympic Games, and yet the Met Police used £500,000 in order to fight that threat. Was that not a misuse of resources, and can we rely on, in future, that resources are going to have, when you spend resources, there's going to be some evidence base for doing so?
right. Well, first of all, I wasn't the one who made the case for it, but I will now try to explain it. I think there's a reasonable expectation is that with the mass movement of people, not least of which was, large numbers of workers, migrant workers who work in that area. Well, I said that area, being around Newham, obviously around the major Olympic parks, but there are other venues around the country too, is that sex workers may have been attracted to that environment, and that with the mass movement of international visitors, there's potential for people being forced, the forced labour that goes with that, to have increased. And there were mass movements of people. So it seemed to me a reasonable expectation. And of course, if we hadn't planned for it, we'd have come to a venue like this and somebody said, well, have you planned for it? Have you thought about it? So I think they thought about it reasonably. Although £500,000 is a lot of money, it wouldn't buy an awful lot of people. So I think it was probably a reasonable precaution. The fact it didn't materialise could prove that, in fact, it worked, because the thing they were trying to prevent, they prevented. It could prove that, in fact, the problem was never, it could prove that the problem never arose, of course. So I can't give you a better answer. It seemed to be a reasonable preparation, and it doesn't seem to be an extraordinary amount of money given the nature of the problem.
I remember being asked about it here.
Commissioner, my cat protects me from attack by tigers, and the evidence and the proof is that I have not yet been attacked by a tiger.
Yes.
And I would, to cut this short, Commissioner, I'd be very grateful if you could acquaint me with the evidence from any previous Olympic Games that led to the belief that there would be an increase in people trafficking prior to the event. If there was evidence, I happily withdraw, but I know of none. And I'd like you to make me look silly by producing that evidence.
I'll do it, but the only thing I will do it, but I'll try and reassure you in two ways. This was money that was gained from the government. If you remember, the government spent over £9 billion on the Olympic Games, of which, from memory, so I may be wrong, but you're talking hundreds of millions around security. I do know that they were very rigorous in saying to both to the Met and others about, well, why do you want this money? So there must have been a case and they must have been convinced by it. So I think that's a reasonable point. And secondly, it may be that it's not affected previous Olympic Games, but of course the world's moved on. We're 4 years on. We've got accession states to the EU. That's caused some economic mass migration, which this city is affected by very significantly. We know that there are certain parts of London where people are living in beds and sheds. We know that people are outside the system. And some of those people are being preyed on to be sex workers. So I think the world has moved on, and we have to react to the world we have, and we have to make some reasonable predictions about what would have happened during the game. So I can see why they may not be dot and comma proof, but I don't think anybody could say it's an unreasonable professional assumption which was politically supported.
Yeah, I do remember being asked about this, and I hope I don't want to impugn what happened in Germany, but I seem to remember that there were questions about was it the World Cup in Germany, and the suggestion that there had been such a problem associated with that big sporting event, and it seems to me that it's a little bit unfair to beat up on the Met when a problem that was, I think, clearly identified some way out by lots of people actually didn't materialise, perhaps, as the Commissioner says, because of the preventative measures that they took.
I agree, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like you to acquaint me with that evidence from Germany, because I've been acquainted with it, and during the period of the World Cup, apparently it amounted to possibly 2 or 3 people.
Well, there you go.
Possibly and debatably. People trafficking is a real problem, and what I'm talking about is the targeting of resources on what you can demonstrate is a problem. In last year, there were only four trafficking cases found last year.
That's very interesting.
And if we're going to allocate resources, we need firm evidence in order to do it, and not, may I say, respond to what the newspapers may say is a threat, but rather use the real academic evidence that is available. But
Most
I'll leave
interesting.
it.
Most interesting, Andrew. I mean, you're putting a perspective on it that I hadn't heard before, and I will certainly try and get to the bottom of that one for you.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Arbour.